I see in London the other day these horrible people standing on the London Underground chanting for Intifada, and I look and I think we've had a taste of Intifada. Exactly, trains like this were blown up in 2005
Right.
by suicide bombers. We had Intifada.
So what would
when
happen?
we had Intifada when this horrible young man of Libyan descent at the age of 22 goes into the Ariana Grande concert at Manchester Arena in 2017 and blows up 23 young women for going to a pop concert. We've had a taste of this. We don't want any more of that. I beg European leaders to recognize that at some point they have to say that. We've had enough of that taste. And if you want more of that, you have to go. We imprison you or you have to leave.
Brace yourselves for a rhetorical hurricane as Douglas Murray unleashes a scorching critique of Western civilization's slow-motion suicide. From Europe's misguided immigration policies to the rise of leftist anti-Semitism, masquerading as social justice, Murray pulls no punches. He exposes the dangerous hypocrisy infecting our institutions, where reason is sacrificed at the altar of political correctness. Is the West's funeral march led by pro-Hamas cheerleaders? Why does Israel trigger the left's meltdown? Are we witnessing the twilight of Western values, or is there still hope for a wake-up call? From Europe's immigration dumpster fire to academia's reason phobia, nothing's sacred. Ready to trade your comfort blanket for a reality check? Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. We've seen just an explosion of anti-Semitism all over the world, really, since October 7th. And the voices calling out this madness are unfortunately much fewer and far between than anybody would have expected. Even people like me is pretty cynical about these things. But one of the clarion voices, one of the clearest voices of reason and of decency has been my old friend, who I'm pleased and proud to call a friend, Douglas Murray, the best-selling author, British author of The Strange Death of Europe and The War on the West, and also a regular contributor to many, many publications, including the New York Post, and I think the London Telegraph and others. So I'm very lucky. He came to Israel, actually, to see what's going on firsthand and report on it here, and he's done it extraordinarily well. So I feel very lucky, very happy to welcome Douglas Murray to my show. Thank you so much for joining me today, Douglas.
It's a real pleasure. I'm glad to be on the Caroline Glick Show.
Oh, thanks. And I'm glad that you're here in Israel with us at this time. I really think it's wonderful. And I'll start out this conversation by just saying thank you for standing with us. It's empowering to see a powerful voice like you speaking out and speaking the truth. So thank you.
Well, thank you, but it's my honor. It really is.
Now, I actually want to start with my intro, which is we're seeing all of these riots, all of these mass, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of London on Saturday, every Saturday. And then last Saturday, which was Remembrance Day for British soldiers of the two world wars, I think some reports said 300,000, some said 500,000, whatever it was, multitudes of Hamas supporters on the streets calling for the annihilation of the Jewish people, attacking Jews on the streets when they're coming out of synagogues, and just unbelievable scenes. And also they're being repeated in New York and in Washington, outside of the White House, on Times Square, all over Brooklyn, California, LA. There was one calling for globalizing the Intifada, and, peace is not what we want liberation, etc. And of course, university campuses all over the Western world. I can go on, and I would, but I won't. Is the West dead? You wrote a book with the Strange Death of Europe, but is it just, how do you look at it? I mean, what's your explanation for what we're seeing?
I mean, there's several explanations. One is, of course, as I wrote about in The Strange Death of Europe, the result of mass migration into the European continent. Countries like Germany that didn't have a dearth of anti-Semites suddenly imported millions more.
Right.
Which doesn't seem to me to have been the greatest decision. But I wrote about that at length. Obviously, and it's not to say all Muslims are anti-Semites, but it seems that an awfully large percent are,
yeah,
and or at least carry it somewhere, or at least, care deeply to their bones when the Palestinian-Israeli conflicts happen, and don't seem to notice or care much at all when hundreds of thousands of their co-religionists are killed in Yemen or Syria.
Why can't the West see the irony in importing intolerance, which kindled its own cultural bonfire? Amid all this chaos, these demonstrations of, let's say, enthusiasm, make Europe's migration policy akin to inviting a carnivore to a vegan feast. Are the Western nations unaware of how their hospitality serves as fertile ground for extremist ideologies? Or are they, like a bad sitcom, simply repeating tired plot lines hoping for a different outcome?
So they've brought a form of anti-Semitism with them into Europe. Then there is pretty much only one other form of anti-Semitism which is tolerated in Europe now, and that's the anti-Semitism of the left. There is a rump of anti-Semitism on the far right, and it's different in different countries in Europe, but broadly speaking, we're so alert to that it never comes anywhere near the center of politics, really. Whereas the far left anti-Semitism does. I mean, in Britain, we had Jeremy Corbyn, who was the leader of the Labour Party. Thankfully, the Labour Party has shifted a lot since his time in office.
Yeah,
but that was close. That was close.
But I think also his replacement was, what is his name? Keir
Starmer.
Yeah, he actually made some statements I've seen during the past several weeks that were pretty morally questionable.
Well, he's been trying to hold his party together. For instance, he was trying to hold his party together not to call for a ceasefire. And he had several prominent members of his party break that attempted unity. So he's obviously under considerable pressure on his left. But yes, I mean, there is this sort of anti-Semitism of the left, which obviously is the same type as in America you get on the campuses with the non-Muslim students, which is this sort of stupid version of American history that's been transplanted onto Israel, and it's the language of colonizers and of indigenous peoples and of empire, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was notable in the L.A., the video that I saw of the L.A. Hamas rally, that they were saying that they wanted to decolonize the United States, and that they essentially want to destroy America as well as
Yes, it's all about decolonization, right. And they put this version of American social justice theory, such as it is, on top of the Middle East, and that's why, as I was saying, the people who do good work going out and doing vox pop interviews with students, asking them what they know about anything that they're chanting about, it's like they don't know anything.
No.
I mean, if I'm a student at any Ivy League university, even in America, who can answer the most basic questions about this country.
But that also speaks of and that's sort of at one of the foundations of this new left green-red alliance, which is the rejection of reason as a basis for meaning.
Well, as I say in the war on the West, reason has been decried as a white European male fetish, like accuracy and turning up on time. And I'm not exaggerating at all. That's in the lists of things that are now regarded as being predominantly dead white male ideas.
Well, I mean, I don't know when it started, but I think that the most sort of arresting early exhibition of this was with Pope Benedict XVI, when in 2016 he was giving this speech, I think in Germany, where he was talking about the dialogue between was it a Byzantine Christian?
Oh, the 2006 Regensburg lecture.
Right, Regensburg lecture, and it was it was a Byzantine pope, right, and a Muslim leader in the Ottoman Empire, and he said, "You guys reject reason," and then the response of the Islamic world was to show that, in fact, it was true. They completely have no interest in reason. They killed 15 nuns.
Europe's importing intolerance like it's a trendy new fashion, while leftist anti-Semitism gets a free pass, parading as social justice. Are campuses now breeding grounds for ignorance, where decolonization means erasing common sense? Reason, once a pillar of thought, is now dismissed as outdated, leaving us to wonder, is this the new Enlightenment or just a descent into chaos? And why are nuns paying the price for this madness?
Because of that.
Yeah, that was a terrible thing, not least for Pope Benedict, who I think really retreated from further pronouncements after that. Yeah. It's a terrible burden, even for a pope to bear. But yes, I mean, if you say somebody or a group of people have a problem with reason and they say, "How dare you," and then go bananas and start killing
Indicated
everyone,
that you were right.
it could be said to be a justification of the original statement.
So Western civilization is based on a lot of concepts, and one of them really is reason. I mean, it's
Rationalism.
thinking, rationality, and when you see on college campuses a rejection of this completely, and also among politicians who are pushing the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of the rest of it, that reject the concept of a meritocracy, which means that knowledge means nothing, capabilities mean nothing. All of these seem to
they all become secondary at any rate.
So what's that? You mean only if you're black and qualified?
I'm just saying that qualification becomes a secondary requirement after diversity.
You have to have the right politics, and then if you're also qualified, that gives you a leg up.
If you're qualified, it's a bonus.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, all of that stuff is a sort of thought rot that has gone through the systems in the West, and I think it has deep implications in domestic and foreign affairs. It means that reason stops being a justification for things. The evidence can be dismissed, and then you get into that position that Jonathan Swift said centuries ago, the great British satirist, you can't reason somebody out of a position they weren't reasoned into. And we have a lot of people who were not reasoned into positions that they currently hold. And the people you talk about, for instance, at American campuses, the people on the streets of our cities across Europe and the wider West, these people were not reasoned into the position they're in. And so the hope that some of us have that reason could get them out of it might well be a totally forlorn hope.
Well, that's the question is,
When did rational thought become optional in decision-making? If our academic institutions and governments dismiss reason in favor of fitting diversity criteria, are we sacrificing capability at the altar of political correctness? Jonathan Swift would relish today's absurdity. How do we reason with those not reasoned into their beliefs? The West might be ditching logic, leaving us with, as a bonus, chaos.
What do you think the average Brit who was on the street yesterday looking at what was happening or just watching on television and been seeing this Saturday after Saturday in cities around the country, is there even an average Brit anymore? I don't know, but how do you see people responding to this, and also in the United States? I mean, because that's really the question. You can't reason the mob out of what they haven't been reasoned into, but can you reason a silent majority to throw out that mob?
Of course, and you don't even, it's not even about reason at some level. It's about self-worth, pride. The people who protested yesterday and the day we're speaking in London, they chose the 11th of November for their protest. Now, the 11th of November is Armistice Day, Remembrance Day in the UK and across the Commonwealth.
Veterans Day in America.
Veterans Day in America, when we remember the sacrifice of the dead of 2 world wars. Now, to most of us who are British, this is a very sacred day.
It is still to British.
Yeah, it's at the heart of us. The cenotaph to the dead of the wars, the laying of the wreaths, the 2 minutes silence, and so on. This connects us to our past in a way that all peoples have to have some kind of connection. In Britain, it's a sacred day and a sacred event, and the cenotaph is a sacred place because it reminds us of the sacrifice that our forebears made, and we all have family stories of what that looked like. Everyone does. However big their sacrifice was, everyone made a sacrifice. When twice in 40 years, people from across the United Kingdom and the Empire were called out of their homes and their fields and their factories and sent off to fight. And so, we've heard a lot in recent years about the sacred places of Islam and the sacred beliefs of Islam. Well, as I often say, we have our own sacred places too, and our own sacred beliefs. And the decision of mainly Hamas-linked organizations in the UK to organize a million-man march, as they called it. They didn't make a million, but it was scarily large. The decision to have a million-man march in solidarity with Palestine on the 11th of November was a spitting on our sacred places. It was, as the Prime Minister said, needlessly provocative. And I think they have woken up part of the sleeping soul of Britain, which does not like this. It does not like this at all.
But what does that mean that they woke you up? Because, I mean, you see that, and you've spoken out about it, that your Minister of Public Security, Suella Braverman,
The Home Secretary. Yeah.
Home Secretary, she's being pilloried by everybody for trying to stand up to this and talking about the indecency of it.
Yes,
Also,
she said they were hate marches, which they are. She said they were hate marches and promptly got attacked by all the media and even some colleagues. She was completely accurate. These are hateful marches.
Armistice Day, sacred to Brits, hijacked by pro-Hamas protesters. A million-man march on Remembrance Day. This event not only stirs national pride, but also questions Britain's ability to navigate complex multicultural dynamics while maintaining respect for its sacred traditions. While the media pillories Suella Braverman for calling out hate marches, isn't she just stating the obvious? Has political correctness gone so far that we can't even call a spade anymore?
If you have huge crowds going down the streets immediately after the massacre of Jews on October 7th, and they didn't wait a day.
No.
They got straight off with their so-called protest, and they've been doing it every week ever since. And every week, as we can see from multiple videos, you have people calling for jihad, chanting from the river to the sea, and all of these other things. And yes, these are hate marches, of course. I mean, if they wanted to call for a two-state solution or something like that, they could do, but you don't hear much of that on the marches. It's all intifada.
But that's the thing, is that when you think about it, and I guess that's why I asked you at the outset if the West is dead or not, because she is attacked. She's not supported, and the Prime Minister isn't really standing with her. And I saw that the Muslim Affairs Advisor for the Metropolitan Police in London, he was leading the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, used to do pro bono work for terrorists when they were on trial. So, I mean, you have, and then, of course, what is he called? The First Minister of Scotland. You called
Hamza Yusuf.
Hamza Yusuf, like you said. I mean, he's acting like he's actually the First Minister of Gaza, not of Scotland, and yet he's in charge. And so they have these constituents that they are either afraid of or they think are the majority, or, I mean, are they? Why is it that Suella Braverman is getting attacked for saying the plain, honest truth?
I think there's several reasons. One is simply that anyone who said the truth would be attacked. Anyone who called this out would be attacked.
By why?
Because people have completely lost control of up and down, right and left, right and wrong, reality, fantasy. I mean, what other group of people, other than the Jews, would suffer such a terrible atrocity and then themselves be attacked, and for that not to be a scandal and a shame of historic proportions? But that's where we are. Suella Braverman has been completely correct in what she said, and she has been attacked, as anyone will be, because of the number of people who are just people with very malicious intent, not just to Israel but to Britain. And I think there are some other additional reasons why a very striking, her predecessor as Home Secretary, Priti Patel, also a very distinguished public servant, had a strong line on many of these issues as well, and was also disproportionately attacked by the media and elsewhere. And I think there's an explanation for that, which is that I think that the left has a particular hatred for women and a particular hatred for any group that is anybody of any group that is meant to be in their intersectional pie, not being in it. So
True.
They think that Suella Braverman, because she happens to be of immigrant background, must be on the radical left. They think that Priti Patel, because she happens to be the daughter of immigrants, must be on the radical left. It's like, no, no, no. These are women who thought for themselves and can have their own views, thank you very much.
Why is Suella Braverman calling out hate marches, getting flack? Is it because truth-telling is now a radical act? Bah, post-October 7th. Protests chant for jihad, not peace. Yet Braverman's vilified. Perhaps because she defies the immigrant equals leftist stereotype. Are we so lost that condemning anti-Semitic rhetoric is controversial? Or is it just easier to attack women who think independently?
But it's intolerable to the radical left because they seem to think they own these people. They seem to think they own these women.
True.
And I think that causes a disproportionate hatred to come their way. And you see that in the coverage of them. It's completely irrational.
But the coverage in general in Britain, and we ask this question all the time in Israel too, how on earth did Netanyahu ever get elected prime minister? Because the media, since the very outset, back in the days when he was the UN ambassador, hated him here. And yet, and then there's always this question, okay, but where would he be today politically if the media didn't hate him this much? Would Israel be as riven by division if we didn't have this incredible bias in our media against the right, against feminist and strong women on the right, against anything, that, like you said, bursts their bubble of self-righteousness. And that goes to the question, all right, but you look at the BBC. BBC refuses to acknowledge that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's extraordinary.
Very reluctantly. The wording they currently use is Hamas, which has been designated a terrorist entity by the British, American, and other governments, which ordinarily does it. Like if your own government designates the group terrorist, it would be normal for the national broadcaster to call that group a terrorist group. But it's like pulling teeth with them, getting them anywhere there. That's been the case for a long time with the BBC.
Forever.
And if you want an explanation for it, you can still say, well, it's the same sort of thinking as the Foreign Office in London. I've said for years, look, the British Foreign Office still regards the Golan Heights as occupied.
Well, unfortunately, the White House is trying to figure out a way to get it back to being called occupied.
Yes, I would say it wouldn't be wonderful to see who the Israelis should hand the Golan back to. Because, it's true that Bashar al-Assad has not had a large enough killing field in the last 12 years. Maybe he could just extend his work there if the Israelis were forced to hand the Golan to Damascus. But my point is simply this is facetious thinking on their part, and they stick with it doggedly, even when it is provably wrong. And that is part of the Foreign Office in the UK, and a significant part of the same thinking goes through the BBC and other media.
So, I guess the question we haven't gotten an answer to yet, maybe we won't, is when the average Brit watches BBC or any of these other medias that are pushing a line that Hamas isn't really a terrorist organization. Like everybody says it, but you know what we mean, not wink wink, when we don't call it that ourselves. And Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and all of this other nonsense, and pretending that the protesters calling for the annihilation of Jews all over are peaceful protesters, whereas people who oppose them are arrested. And I don't know what that means about the future.
The radical left's delusion of owning women and their irrational hatred for Netanyahu exposes media hypocrisy. Despite their venom, he thrives while they sulk. The BBC's refusal to call Hamas terrorists, despite government designation, is laughable. This twisted narrative emboldens lies, painting pro-Israel voices as villains and genocidal chants of peaceful. The UK's outdated diplomatic fantasies crumble, yet elites cling to extremist sympathies, flipping truth on its head.
I
think it means it's going to be very difficult. I think everyone should gird themselves for a very difficult period. I mentioned earlier about the sort of the I don't need to tell you already, certainly no Israelis watching that the sympathy lasted for what, a few hours maybe? Maybe.
But already on October 8th, Joe Biden was saying, you have to keep faith with international law because,
right.
Israel. Right.
That tells us something. And as for all of the really very, very sick people marching and talking against Israel in the period since October 7th, these people, I think, the same ones who sort of march for Hamas and so on, they find what Hamas did an encumbrance where they don't celebrate it. They find it an encumbrance.
And they're trying to deny it.
And many are trying to deny it or downplay it or say, no, it wasn't that number of babies beheaded. X number of babies were beheaded, but these ones maybe were beheaded afterwards, or maybe we weren't entirely beheaded. And you get this, and to even be in this terrain is to be in the terrain of moral sickness. But I think that some will look away, as far as I can tell. They don't want to stare the horrors of what Hamas did in that brigade-sized attack on Israel. But they think they're in that very dangerous realm of, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And they'd rather not see the messiness of the process, but, And I'm always reminded of one, inevitably, like all journalists, one of my heroes, George Orwell, who once, speaking to a Stalinist in the 1940s, had a conversation in which Stalinists ended up accepting that, yes, okay, maybe the show trials, okay, maybe the Gulag, okay, maybe the... Okay, and eventually comes out...
But what's your point?
Yeah, eventually comes out with a line, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And George Orwell said to him, oh yeah, where's your omelette?
Very nice, very nice.
And I'd ask that of these people. What does your omelette really look like? You've turned away from all of the breaking of heads and the smashed skulls and the torn bodies. You've turned away from all of that. What's the goal you've got? What's this glorious dream you have? And I'm afraid that for many of those people, it is the annihilation of the one Jewish state.
No, I'm pretty sure you're right. And that really, it brings me to the sort of the other question about this specific thing, which is, we've been hearing for decades, and very smart people have been saying for decades, that Israel is a canary in the mine shaft, or that Israel is a litmus test for humanity. And so I'm just wondering, okay, so what is the canary that's being attacked in the mine shaft telling humanity? What are we saying? Just look out, or what is a litmus test for?
The left's moral bankruptcy is staggering. They squirm over Hamas's atrocities and nitpicking body counts like deranged accountants. Only ex-babies beheaded. Who? These sickos can't face the horror they've enabled. Their dream? It's the vile annihilation of the world's sole Jewish state. Israel's struggle is more than a litmus test. It's a warning to humanity against embracing blind extremist ideologies that glorify destruction over civilization.
For humanity, what are our trials supposed to be signaling specifically?
Well, the stakes are so high here, aren't they? I don't need to tell you they are the highest stakes imaginable. I say, I said a few times since the attacks of last month that I sometimes wonder, in some parallel universe, if the state of Israel was not strong, and if its people were not strong, and if its young men and women didn't amazingly go and put themselves and their lives on the line at an age when their cohorts and contemporaries in America and elsewhere in the West are still playing around, smoking joints and reading a bit of Foucault. If Israel wasn't strong and the people who dislike or critique this state had their way, what would be the result? Annihilation. So, and the people who speak all the time about from the river to the sea, or the boundaries that they see, they would simply see either the wiping out of the people of Israel or the mass deportation of the people of Israel somewhere else, and this would be in the name of the left, and in the name of people who believe they're acting in the name of social justice. And we have seen this before historically, of course. If you have one thing to guide you morally, and it's don't be Hitler, you can still become Hitler. This is the contemporaries of the former German foreign minister Joschka Fischer. There's a great book by Paul Berman about it called Power and the Idealists, about how the one thing that Joschka Fischer's generation knew not to do was not to be their parents. When they were growing up in the 50s, don't be a Nazi, don't be like our parents. And what does some of that generation of leftist German politicians, particularly the Green movement and so on, become? They end up supporting the Palestinians in plane hijackings and end up participating and separating Jews from non-Jews. It's like, right, you've done it again.
Yeah.
You've done it again. And that is one of the things happening today.
Yeah,
in the world.
one of my stories about Yoshka Fisher is one of the big frustrations of my professional career, which was that he came and he spoke in Israel like 2000 or 2002, the previous Palestinian jihad. And he was explaining to us why we really had to give up on Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and Gaza because of demography. And so I raised my hand, and the moderator wouldn't call on Carolyn Glick because that would be too dangerous,
Sure.
right? But the question that I wanted to ask him was, how dare a German foreign minister talk to us about the number of Jews?
Sure.
And like he didn't see any irony in what he was saying. It never occurred to him that Germans shouldn't be lecturing us about the dearth of Jews in the land of Israel.
Yeah. It's always the way. A very smart young female audience member of mine in Berlin at a speech I was doing a little while ago for one of my books coming out in German made a very interesting point. She said, it seems not to matter what our ideology is, we always think we should lead the rest of the world.
That's great. That's great. But I guess I was, we were talking about the Million Man March, and what, of course, immediately rang in my head was Louis Farrakhan, who gave this Million Man March in Washington, D.C. in the 1990s. And, he is perhaps the most influential anti-Semite in the United States since I don't know when.
Imagine a world without Israel's resilience. The river-to-sea zealots would gleefully eradicate Jews, all in the name of twisted justice. Even Germans, with their blood-soaked history, lecture Jews on demography. This moral bankruptcy proves how easily leftist ideals morph into genocidal fantasies. From Fisher's tone-deaf preaching to Farrakhan's venomous influence, we're witnessing a terrifying resurgence of anti-Semitism, cloaked in progressive rhetoric. It's not social justice, it's Nazism repackaged for the 21st century.
Yeah.
And he's one of the inspirations for the Black Lives Matter riots, demonstrations, marches, whatever, of 2020, where they burnt a swath across the United States of America. And, what do you make of these incredible similarities between the pro-Hamas marches and the Black Lives Matter violence?
Well, they seem to draw on the same wellspring, don't they? I mean, they seem to draw on the same sort of urge for action, protest, a culture of repudiation about everything in the West, particularly in America. This call to basically pull it down or burn it down, to use one of the phrases in recent years. And this is something we've heard before. In fact, you could argue we've heard it across our histories in a way, certainly from the late 18th century onwards, that you always have this movement that believes that we've gone wrong and we need to reset, and the reset might include burning everything down. And of course, one of my favorite stories of that is in the great late Tom Wolfe's Radical Chic, when he has that story of the Black Panther fundraiser at Leonard Bernstein's apartment in New York. You remember, and Tom Wolfe describes the exquisite canapes that are being handed around, and Mrs. Bernstein, carefully getting all the guests. I don't believe you've met. And there are these terrorist Black Panthers who give their presentation, and the Bernstein's circle. And Otto Preminger is there and is sitting in the front row, and at some point says to the lead Panther who's explaining, how you burn it all down. And Otto Preminger says, "But what are you going to do?" And he keeps saying, "No, but yes, I understand that, but what are you going to do?" And eventually the Panther says, "You can't put a blueprint on the future, man."
Oh.
And Leonard Bernstein rather wonderfully says, "You mean you're just going to wing it?" I mean, I ask all these people who think that, burn it all down. This is so unfair. There's, destroy the injustice, blah, 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 blah. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you sure you know what happens the day after that? Are you sure that Robespierre doesn't come to power? Are you sure that the people who come are much worse? Now, this is a question that people in this country know very, very well.
Yeah.
But the rest of the West, outside of Israel, has forgotten this. They've forgotten that you can't order events like that.
Well, I don't know. You kind of can. I mean, if you're trying to kill and burn your way to a new order in your country, What are the chances of this coming out well?
Yeah, almost nil.
Right?
I mean, certainly not coming out your way.
The Black Lives Matter riots and pro-Hamas marches share a reckless urge to dismantle Western society, echoing history's chaotic revolutions. Remember Bernstein's naive elite, embracing chaos without a plan? They'd wing it into oblivion. But what follows? Destruction. A modern Robespierre, perhaps. The West's amnesia is dangerous. This isn't justice, it's courting disaster. Such blind upheaval promises a worse order, turning naive dreams into nightmares.
I mean, think of, what about the communist revolution in Iran in the 1970s? You thought there can't be anything worse than the Shah.
Right.
All massacred in prison in the 80s. Or
By
chased
Raisi,
into exile, you know?
By Raisi, who's now the president. And
Yeah.
I mean, but the hatred for Jews, it just sort of resonates throughout. And you look at the American Jewish community, and they had all of these organizations taking out this full-page ad on behalf of Black Lives Matter in 2019, 2020, talking about how they were so proud to be marching with Black Lives Matter, while Black Lives Matter people were burning Jewish synagogues in Peoria, burning Jewish businesses in Los Angeles, and threatening Jewish synagogues and Jewish schools throughout. And yet it's this idea that, well, we love Black rights. We want to help these people. We are against racism. Therefore, we stand with Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives Matter turns around like the Black Panthers before them and Stokely Carmichael and all of them. And they are annihilationists, Jew haters. And so it's like, there's something very amazing about the way that these groups are united in this passionate annihilationist hatred of Jews. And I saw like these Latinos standing with Hamas in LA. I was really amazed. I guess I shouldn't have been, because apparently there's a lot of Latino anti-Semites in Brooklyn too. Who knew, right? Because, right? And so there are these Latino activists standing with these Hamas supporters, and they're all against Palestine because they have the same climate in LA that they have in Gaza. I mean, literally, that was the argument. And
What?
yeah, it was. Can you call that an argument? I don't know. Anyway, so that was.
You could call it a burp.
That's a good one. I like that. Yeah, what's a burp? Belch. Yeah.
Belch, a brain belch.
So that's the level of hatred, and it's also the level of intellectual capabilities that is being demonstrated here. But how, when you look at this complex of just disparate groups that all are united in this concept, I mean, what comment? Give me an idea. I have a mind. What do you look at this and think?
I mean, where to start? A lot of Jews and others may be in the process of waking up very slowly about the reality you've just described. I mean, that kind of, hang on, we were there for you, how come you're not there for us? That's a hard lesson. That's a sharp learning curve.
Jews back Black Lives Matter's anti-racism, only to watch their synagogues burn and endure anti-Semitic rants. It's like hugging a viper and wondering why it bites. Meanwhile, Latino activists absurdly cozy, up to pro-Hamas rallies, driven by twisted logic. This isn't just ignorance, it's a brain belch of epic proportions. Jews now confront the brutal reality. Their naive solidarity was a one-way ticket to betrayal.
And there's something difficult in that in particular, because I recognize that sort of Jewish liberal instinct very often comes, not always, but very often comes from a good place. We say, we want to support the underdog. We know what it's like to be the underdog. We identify these people as an underdog, therefore we'll stand up with them. But what I would observe is that in America in particular, much of this soggy thinking is the result of, and I say this very carefully as a non-Jew, but it seems to me there's a transmogrification of Judaism into social action that we know in the sort of, what's the name in Hebrew? Tikkun Olam.
Yeah, Tikkun
Olam.
Which is not even a Jewish concept, but it is a socialist Jewish concept.
If you meet somebody who says, I'm Jewish, but I already, but Tikkun Olam, that's what it's all about. You can guarantee those two things follow one after the other. I don't know much about my Judaism, but this is what Judaism is meant to be.
Judaism is communism. That's what
and I think that's been very dangerous.
But what about the other side? What about the side that have all just come together with this idea that the way to all be victims together is to all hate Jewish people at the same time? I mean, to me, like that's not a... It's extraordinary because on the face of it, it doesn't seem like that would have been an instinctive move by all of them. And yet, here we are.
Well, I mean, as we all know, the depths of anti-Semitism are as deep as can be, and it shapeshifts and adapts.
Do you think it's because of the absence of reason from anti-Semitism?
Yeah, and an absence of other groundings. I mean, I think, I take very seriously those pages I've quoted a lot in recent years, but the pages at the center of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, where he takes time out at the middle of the 20th century between Stalingrad and Treblinka to spend 3 or 4 pages maybe in his masterpiece writing about the nature of anti-Semitism. And there's that great line in it. It says almost everything anyone needs to know. Just go to the middle of Life and Fate, about 400 pages in. And he says, it's the, I think of anti-Semitism, he says it can be met in the Academy of Sciences or in the playground. It can be met in the games children play. And he ends up with that very, very important insight that it is as he says, it is the mirror. Tell me what you accuse the Jews of, and I'll tell you what you're guilty of.
Right.
Now, Western Europeans in particular accuse the Jews of having a state because Western Europeans aren't very good at having a state or holding on to their own borders and many other things at the moment. So they dislike the Jews for having borders and having a state. Many other countries have no sense of pride or very little sense of pride or has been beaten out of them. And so when they look at Israel, they don't like that. But it's them that's lacking. It's their fault, not the fault of the Jewish state. I think this is a very, very important insight of Grossman's, and I wish it were better known. But if I make one other observation about this, there are people who say, look, the October massacre was so terrible, and so many Jews have been in particular, have been so shocked by this.
Jewish support for underdogs, rooted in empathy, morphs into dangerous naivety when Judaism becomes mere social activism. Meanwhile, a bizarre alliance thrives on shared victimhood, spewing anti-Semitic bile. They envy Israel's statehood, projecting their failures onto Jews. It's a twisted mirror. They loathe Jewish resilience and borders, revealing their own inadequacies. Instead of admiration, they choose resentment, blinded by their own insecurities.
Maybe they're waking up. My friend Konstantin Kisin wrote a widely passed around piece called The Day the Delusions Died. The good piece for Barry Wise's Free Press. But I said there was something actually that I disagreed with, which is I said he was completely right. He said, look, some people are waking up. He said he literally had friends who called him saying, I went to bed the night before, a liberal, a leftist, and, the next evening was a conservative sort of thing. Well, we don't need to make it a left conservative thing, but if we have a simple, are you aware of what we're up against test, and a small number of people come over every time 1,400 Jews are massacred, we don't have time for that. I mean, this would require the annihilation of every Jew in Israel until a plurality of people on the liberal left, for instance, might recognize we've got a problem. I genuinely throw it out as a problem. Can we go at that speed?
No, I've gotten to a point, I don't know, especially weirdly, but like over the past week or two, where I have sort of veered toward from incredible sadness to incredible rage, and always this sense of underlying frustration when I look abroad. Because really? Like, are you waking up now? I mean, we've only been, and it's not just that, it's a demonization that they did of everybody who warned about this for the past 25, 30 years.
You and I know that.
Yes, we do. I mean, we both suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune on this thing. But I mean, it's really, so now you're the expert. All right, then let me just quote you then, Mr. Dershowitz. But I mean, I look at it and it's but what I'm seeing on the screen, like Macron channeling his inner de Gaulle when he accused us of killing women and babies. I was like, really? Now what? Now you're going to give up Algeria again? I mean, like, what is it? You've already given up the suburbs of Paris. Is this your way? You're trying to, and really, it's true of all of these leaders who came on this a train. There's this caravan of leaders coming and having photo ops with Prime Minister Netanyahu and expressing their concern and their support for Israel, and then flying home, or while they're still here, telling you got to follow the laws of war, and we need a Palestinian state, or coming home and saying we need a Palestinian state, and then starting to decry the war crimes and God. What are you talking about? Is it? I just wonder how powerful these forces of unreason are. That that it is a smattering of people the coming out of the closet and realizing that it's not really that they went to sleep a liberal and woke up a conservative. They went to sleep woke and they woke up Jewish. I mean, that's really what it is, isn't it? So,
yeah, I think that's well said. Well said. I think always, it's that realization is what James Burnham and many others have written about in the past. But, the fact that the monsters are real, the jungle is real. It's
Konstantin Kaisen's piece, The Day the Delusions Died, is insightful. But if awakening requires 1-400 massacred Jews for liberal epiphanies, we lack time. Shocking it's taken such tragedy for some to realize what's real, the jungle, the monsters. Leaders fly in, express concern, then return preaching laws of war. The issue isn't going to bed liberal and waking conservative, it's waking to reality and finally understanding Jewish vulnerability.
It's not the case that most of the world looks like or respects the values of Milan or Paris, and people like Macron are, to a great extent, making a set of statements for their own domestic survival.
So what would happen? Let's just do a thought experiment. If Emmanuel Macron came home and said, gee, what I just saw in Israel is terrifying. And I see it happening here too. Our police can't go into a lot of different places in our cities. We had priests being beheaded in churches. We've had so much terrorism here, and it's all coming from Islamic jihadists. We're done. If you even remotely support jihad, we're gonna throw you out. Well,
of course.
What would happen? How long would it take for him to be killed? I mean, what would happen?
I mean, that's what I would do, because I think that's what you have to do. I think that you can't tolerate this. You can't tolerate terrorism, and this is what, unfortunately, France has suffered so much in recent years. And I admire the French Republic hugely. I admire its grit, its ability to get through things that I think many other societies would not. I mean, the assassination of everyone from your most prominent secularists at Charlie Hebdo to a priest saying mass at the altar in Rouen is a pretty comprehensive cross-section of society to take out just right there.
And the Bastille Day
the Bastille Day, the Bataclan, the Stadium,
everybody,
everywhere. But it's the same thing. I see in London the other day these horrible people standing on the London Underground chanting for Intifada, and I look and I think, we've had a taste of Intifada. Exactly, trains like this were blown up in 2005 by suicide bombers. We had Intifada.
So what would happen?
We had Intifada when this horrible young man of Libyan descent at the age of 22 goes into the Ariana Grande concert at Manchester Arena in 2017 and blows up 23 young women for going to a pop concert. We've had a taste of this. We don't want any more of that. I beg European leaders to recognize that at some point they have to say that. We've had enough of that taste. And if you want more of that, you have to go. We imprison you or you have to leave. And Macron, the problem that he has is, he banned protests at the beginning of all of this.
Right, he really went down.
Protests happened.
Right.
Now, what does that tell you? You're losing control of the streets, or you've lost control of the streets. Same thing in Britain. Somebody I know went over to the Metropolitan Police the other day in Trafalgar Square at one of the protests and said, "How can I report a hate crime?" And the officer said, well, I mean, and he said, "Because there's a great big hate crime happening over there. Why don't you arrest them all?" And the officer of the Metropolitan Police said, "We're outnumbered." Now, if that is their attitude, we just have so much hell coming our way, because we can't have that as our attitude. It can't be that we just play this who's the biggest thug game, because that can spiral in any direction.
Imagine Macron returning from Israel and confronting France's reality, admitting terror's roots in Islamic extremism. Picture him declaring zero tolerance, threatening expulsion for jihad supporters. How long before he's silenced, or worse? France has endured horror from Charlie Hebdo to Bataclan. Yet words alone won't reclaim lost streets. In Britain, cops admit being outnumbered by lawlessness. Leaders must act, else Europe tumbles into chaos, pitting decency against brute thuggery.
But you and I have written about this for years. Other people have, and you see things happen, and you think maybe this will shift opinion, and you discover that we're wildly able to absorb utter atrocities on a regular basis and memory hold them. It's 18 months since a British MP was massacred in his constituency office in Britain by an Islamist, and this was one. MPs do not get assassinated very often in the UK, thank God, and this is highly unusual, and it's already forgotten about. And his colleagues at their debate in his memory a couple of days later, memory hold them. They said they talked about him as if he died of natural causes. Well, I've said many times they all let down their colleague. They didn't honour him. They let him down. They should have said, "We need to face up to the ideology that killed him."
So is it cowardice?
There's a lot of cowardice. There's a lot of fear around, a lot of fear in the atmosphere. But, I think that people are going to have to accept that, as many people have said before, you have to man up, straighten your back, get ready, and don't die on your knees.
It was really interesting. I think I've told this story before, I don't know. After 9/11, I was on one of the first flights out to the States, and I made my way to Washington, and I was sitting with an old friend at a bar, and it was just like a week or so after 9/11. We're in an Irish pub, and all of these men are talking, and they're saying, one of them, they start talking about how the Israelis got it right, and I wanted to say something. My friend said to me, "Shh, be quiet." And I said, "Why? Look, they're pro-Israel. Look, they're standing with it." And he said, "Shh." So I waited. And then the leader said, "Oh, but those Jews." And then he started in and attacking Israel. And I don't even remember what it was that he said, but it was just this raging anti-Semitic thing. And then everybody who had stood up and said, "Israel has it right," just said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Whoa, good thing I listened to you." And, we're looking now and we're seeing that the people standing up to the jihadists on the street in England and in Paris are on the far right. I don't know, far right. I don't even know. I'm a far right. So you're a far, like anybody who's not on the left is a far right.
I'm a total centrist. And
I think I'm a leftist.
And I'm a centrist. I'm a centrist compared to what's going to come if they don't address this. Because, first of all, you can't have this situation where, doubtless there were some far-right people who turned up, but there were also just patriotic British people who turned up. And I don't see why there should be this double standard of every British patriot who turns up must be a far-right thug, and every Hamas supporter is a peacenik.
Is a peaceful
protest. I don't accept it.
Well, you shouldn't, because it's a lie. But the thing is that I'm wondering, I saw this BBC report that said that there's going to be a pro-Israel demonstration in Paris, I don't know, next Sunday, sometime soon. And that Mélenchon, the head of the left party, said he would definitely not come.
Of course not. No.
And Marine Le Pen said she's definitely coming.
The hypocrisy is staggering. A British MP's assassination by an Islamist is memory hold, while his cowardly colleagues avoid confronting the ideology behind it. Meanwhile, the media paints every pro-Israel demonstrator as a far-right thug. but Hamas supporters are peaceful protesters. It's a dangerous double standard. When Marine Le Pen supports Israel while Mélenchon shuns it, the political landscape is truly warped. We're witnessing a bizarre inversion where standing against jihad is deemed extreme, while appeasing it is moderate.
But they don't want Le Pen.
I don't know who they is, and I don't know what one.
They won't want Le Pen.
Well, she wants to come.
Of course. It's a classic European dilemma.
Right. So here's the question that I wanted to ask you. Is this a bear hug from the right? I mean, how do you look at the... They understand that there's a connection between Israel's fate and the fate of France, the fate of England, the fate of, I don't know, Holland or wherever have you, or Germany with the AfD and all that. Who are these people? I mean, are we supposed to be as frightened of them as we are, or frightened of them? I mean,
I'm frightened from every direction. I dislike intensely the Vichyite strain that remains in a bit of French politics. I would want to be nowhere near it. It's not my politics. I feel the same with some of the other noxious strains that still exist on parts of the right and the far right in Europe.
In America, it's getting stronger, actually.
There's a whiff of it now in America. I dislike this intensely. This is not my politics. But
anybody other than these people save these nation states of Europe from the Islamists?
Then, as you say, it's this question of would the Jews of France be happy to put their future in the hands of Marine Le Pen?
They didn't think so. They didn't vote for her.
No, and then there are others. I mean, I've slightly given up on this, but over recent years, I've spent a lot of time with a lot of politicians from across Europe. Partly after The Strange Death of Europe became a bestseller and came out in translation all across Europe. I would always go again to every country whenever a translation came out and meet political leaders. And I'm probably the only person who's met this number of European politicians without being paid to have to do so. And I've done it because I'm interested. And it's really tricky. Country after country, it's really tricky. Like Italy, it's tricky. Meloni comes out of a movement in Italy that was Mussolini adjacent. It was Mussolini admiring. She's obviously moved. Do you know exactly where she's moved? No. I mean, I've had rows with her. Matteo Salvini, who was the interior minister in Italy, I did an event with him and Dori Gold and others at the Italian Senate a few years ago condemning anti-Semitism and I felt confident that Matteo Salvini is not an anti-Semite, but all of this shifts all the time, and
like those Irish guys in the pub.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, there's one that really worries me, which, I mean, there's enough, I think, trust between us and the nuance in the people watching to understand this point, and because it's a tricky point to make, but I do notice one form of anti-Semitism rising on the right, which comes along in the following form, and it is, I got a lot of this after The Strange Death of Europe came out, is Israel has closed borders, understands the importance of very, very carefully curated migration, yet...
Europe's far-right clowns claim to fight Islamists while hiding their own hate. Le Pen's fake hug and Italy's shady leaders are no heroes. They love Israel's walls but hate foreigners. Can these two-faced liars save Europe, or are they just selling fear? Our future hangs by a thread, tangled in their lies and greed. These so-called saviors are wolves in sheep's clothing.
Jewish groups in the West tend to be pro-open borders, pro-mass migration. And I find this a genuinely terrifying crossroads, because that I mean,
you hear it all the time in America.
Yeah, it's bad. It's almost certain that any Jewish group in America, in order to keep its liberal credentials, will be talking about the importance of open borders, or in bringing in the dispossessed of the world. And it only needs somebody to say that doesn't seem to be what Israel's doing, to grow a form of noxious new anti-Semitism on the right. And I fear that coming, and I have said that to people, and I don't see many people listening, but I'll keep saying it anyway.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I just want to end this by talking about faith, really. I mean, the first time that I saw you was during I think first time we met. I don't remember the circumstances. Maybe we were at a conference together. I don't remember. But you came to Israel with Ayaan Hirsi Ali around 2000, somewhere between 2000 and 2002, about the same time that Yoshka Fisher made that indelible impression on me with his demography issues. And you guys came, and I think at that time, Ayaan had written Infidel. I think that was really, and it was an amazing book. And she was an atheist, and she had explained, how she left Islam and how she rejected God and everything like that. And then I saw this morning, and I was looking on my Twitter feed, that somebody was citing this article that she wrote 2 days ago.
Yes.
Right, where she called, which she titled "Why I Am Now a Christian," and I wonder about the issue of faith, because she argues it, as she always does, very brilliantly. And she was saying,
it's a beautiful piece.
And it said, look, our concept of how did she put it?
It was in Unheard, by the way. If you
right.
UNHERD, you can find it online.
Right, it's excellent. So she said essentially that the system of liberal internationalism, of how did she put it? I actually, because I knew I would forget it when I was talking to you. She said, we can't fight off these formidable forces of authoritarianism from places like Russia and China, and the wokeness, and of course Islam, unless we answer the question, what is it that unites us? The response that God is dead seems insufficient. So too does the attempt to find solace in the rules-based international order. The only credible answer, I believe, lies in our desire to uphold the legacy of the Judeo-Christian tradition. What do you think of that? You think that the liberal rules-based order has just flunked its test? My
view is that, again, I did some of this in The Strange Death of Europe, but it bears repeating that modern European man has been carefully sawing off the branch of the tree he's sitting on. And there's only a certain amount of time you can remain in the air. I mean, like there's a cartoon, Wile E. Coyote, when he goes over the cliff, his feet spin for a bit.
Right.
Western Jews pushing open borders while Israel locks down. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. This hypocrisy is a gift to right-wing haters. Meanwhile, Europe's lost its backbone, ditching God for some wishy-washy rules-based order. Even ex-atheist Ayaan Hirsi Ali's running back to Jesus. Face it, folks, without solid values, we're sitting ducks for China, Russia, and radical Islam. Time to pick a side or get steamrolled.
Well, maybe we'll come back up. But
I don't know.
I do think, and Habermas's work, which actually I was put onto by Jonathan Sachs, made a huge impression on me when I first read it. The very slim work, but very important one called An Awareness of What's Missing.
An awareness
of what's missing.
I have to look it up.
And it's tricky. I've often thought, when writing about this myself, that Jews have an enormous advantage over Christians in several ways. The one in particular, which is worth citing, which is that it seems to me that the literal belief in God, is easier, and again, I don't want to offend anyone, but I think it's easier to avoid in Judaism than it is in Christianity. The declaration of the creed in Christianity. Do you agree with all of these precepts? Now, a lot of people, myself included, find certain precepts of the Christian faith tricky to accept in their entirety without making what Kierkegaard calls the leap of faith. And the leap of faith for the last few centuries has required the abandonment of reason to some extent, or at least not the abandonment, the temporary suspension of reason to make the truth claim or accept the truth claim of the faith. I say that Jews have a slight advantage on this because, as a story I've told once before, but Jonathan Sachs, I once said rather, is a very dear friend, I miss him a lot, and I said to him once, I said, do you agree, Jonathan, that there are a lot of atheists in your congregation? And he said, oh yes, perhaps even a majority, Douglas. And I said, I was stunned. And I said, what do you make of that? And he replied typically he said, 98% of Jews in Britain will be keeping the holy days this year. And that was such a wonderful answer. You know, it's like Elie Wiesel wrote in The Trial of God. You do this, you keep going, you might have qualms about the faith. You still practice Judaism.
Well, the good thing about Judaism, I don't know, it makes it more accessible for Jews. It's that, you know, we're on three legs. It's a stool. It's the Torah, it's the land of Israel, and it's the people of Israel. And really, they're inextricably linked, all of them. Yeah. So sometimes you can put more emphasis on Zionism and the land of Israel. Sometimes you can put it more on community, on Jewish peoplehood, and sometimes you put more of an emphasis on the Torah, but they're all inextricably linked. So in a way, we're a very gentle totalitarianism for Jews, but it's not the same, I guess, with Christendom, right? Because you don't, I mean, especially since there's no concept of Christendom anymore. Like Christendom, in a way, was a sort of similar creed. And in the absence of that, in the absence of a concept of a Christian state, hopefully not one that wants inquisitions and all that, it's more of a faith-based thing.
Judaism's secret weapon, flexibility. It's a faith practiced even by atheists, with traditions holding the community together. Rabbi Sachs knew Jews could doubt God, but still keep rituals, unlike Christians tangled in dogma, needing a leap of faith. Judaism stands on its strong triad: Torah, Israel, and people, offering a stable belief system. Meanwhile, Christians are floundering without the concept of Christendom.
Yes, I mean, you know, there's a French philosopher I've often cited called Chantal Del Sol, who wrote one of the great books of the last 30 years called Icarus Fallen, which was her analysis of where Western mankind was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And she described the condition of modern Western man as being like that of Icarus if he'd survived the fall.
That he got too close to, so if he actually touched the sun and come down.
In the legend of Icarus, of course, he died.
Right, because the wings melted.
The wings melt, yes.
Right.
And her point was, we're in the position that Icarus would have been in. He flew towards the sun, but he survived. In other words, we survived the horrors of the wars of religion in Europe. We survived the horrors of the wars of Nazi totalitarianism. We survived the horrors of the wars of communist totalitarianism. We should have burned up, probably. We should have died in the fall, and somehow we find ourselves still alive. What to do?
Well,
and the answer...
recognize it's a miracle and believe in the person who gave it to you.
Right. No. Would be one very sensible conclusion, is that we're here for a reason. We've got through this for a reason, and that means we have a purpose, and we have a lot of work to do. Another thing that has been the case, as Del Sol and others point out, is to say, okay, we have a nice time. But the we have a nice time lasts only as long as other people will allow you to. And I mean, there are so many images of recent weeks that, you know, none of us will get out of our heads. Probably shouldn't. One of the ones I find most upsetting still is the idea of the young men and women at the music festival. I was there the other day at the site of where that happened, and I say to any young person watching, of any age, but any young person in particular watching who has any doubts about all this, just consider what it must have been to have been at this peace festival, for the music to be coming up in the early morning, and for you to meet your end in the worst possible way. And then reflect that the people who did that would do it to you as well in a heartbeat, would do it to any of us in a heartbeat. And realize from that, you know, you can earn yourself a little bit of time for your peace rave, but there's a time for the peace rave to be over as well. And it should be over now. And the delusion should have died by now.
Should have been done a long time ago. I guess we could end it there, but I just want to ask you one last question.
We're living on borrowed time. We've survived wars and tyrannies that should have destroyed us, yet here we stand, clueless about our purpose. Why? To throw peace raves while monsters plot our demise. That music festival massacre should have shattered our delusions. We're not safe. We're not special. The world's full of those who'd slaughter us in a heartbeat. It's time to face reality, ditch the kumbaya BS, and fight for our survival.
I at the outset of our conversation, I thanked you for standing with us. And what happened to Douglas Murray that, for as long as I've known you, which is again over 20 years, you have stood with the Jews? Why are you different from so many other people who went to college with you? What brought you to this point?
A friend once said, because I'm very bad at answering any such questions about myself, like British people don't really like to talk
Well,
about
I just am
myself,
hoping
but I
that
would
you
say
might be an example for others.
one friend did say Douglas has a very low tolerance threshold for lies, which is broadly true. I don't like them. I don't like them in the world. And I saw at an early age, probably during the Second Intifada, when I was coming to political consciousness, an awful lot of lies were being told. But the real, I suppose, the thing is probably deeper than that, and at such a deep level, I'm probably not qualified to say what it is. But I've always known, absolutely at my core, that it wouldn't matter to me if I was the only person who thought as I did. As Oriana Fallaci said, I stand with Israel, I stand with the Jews.
Okay, one last question I thought of. Britain, United States supporting Israel. We're looking at it slipping down very quickly. The United States supports both. They're now. I talked about this on my show last week, and I'll probably do it again this week. But that the United States essentially is siding with both sides, and doesn't really is very explicitly not wanting Israel to win in a significant way. I'm not going to go into the whole thing. You guys should watch that. But what does Israel have to do? Is there something, if Israel does, then that will secure the support of the West? Is there something that, or is it not dependent on anything we do?
No, you mustn't. There's no PR trick.
No, I'm not talking about PR.
No.
But on the ground,
well,
if we win, what will happen? That's really the question, I guess, I really wanted to ask you.
Well, as usual, you won't be forgiven for winning in the international community, but that doesn't matter. I think myself that the most important thing is that Israel has to rebuild its deterrent effect. And I think that it has taken a terrible battering in the last month. And the inquiry, the commission inquiry, whatever that comes into this, may cause the battering to go on for a long time, and that will be very bruising. Because a lot of the expectations and hopes, presumptions that the public here had, as well as the international public, and crucially Israel's enemies, will have been dissolved to a great extent. Israel has to build up its capacity to be seen to have a deterrent, both militarily and, more importantly, perhaps in its intelligence deterrent. And I would like to see that asserted as swiftly and as publicly as possible, and for the people of Israel and others to once again have pride in the fact that this state really does know how to look after itself. What that looks like, it's the choice of your politicians to do, but it must be unequivocal and must be something that is respected by your friends and foes alike.
I agree with you. I agree with you. A very well-spoken, as you always are, Douglas Murray. So I thank you very much for joining me today on the program, and thank you for being here. God bless you.
Douglas nails it. Israel's playing defense, but it's time to show strength. Unapologetically. America's playing both sides, not wanting Israel to win big. Forget trying to win PR points or worrying about the West's fickle support. What matters is reclaiming deterrence, both militarily and with intelligence might. Losing that edge invites more hostility. Israel needs to roar back, reminding allies and enemies it won't roll over. It's about survival, pride, and respect on the global stage. Douglas Murray delivered a blistering takedown of Western naivety, from importing intolerance to appeasing extremists. He exposes the dangerous hypocrisy of leftist anti-Semitism and the West's suicidal embrace of chaos. Murray warns we're sleepwalking into disaster, betraying our values and inviting our own destruction. Ready to wake up and fight back? Smash that like button and subscribe for more hard-hitting truth bombs. Share your thoughts below. Are we too far gone, or is there hope for the West? Let's ignite this debate and reclaim our future. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. The battle for civilization waits for no one.